Welcome to Strange Coordinates, the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising places. I am in a bright shaft of sunlight right now, which is unusual for Portland, and that makes me Topher Burns.
And io sono Roberto Baylog. I'm announcing myself as Robert Baylog in the theme of today's episode. Topher and I founded an ad agency called Territorial after lifetimes of working with some of the best brands in the world. We help brands find their place in the world, and we do that by exploring how history and culture and desire and excitement bounce off each other to reveal insights about what's cool about being human.
Indeed. Every episode, one of us gives the other a brand to explore. That person has to trek into the wilderness, come back with a story they find to be most compelling. Could be wild, could be wonderful. It is using brands as compass points to discover more about the world around us.
That's right. And so for this episode, it was my job to give Topher the brand to pursue. And I hope he could keep up with it because it was a speedy one.
Oh.
This brand for this week is Ferrari.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think usually when we start these things off, we're like, oh, what did you think when I gave you the brand Ferrari? I would like to turn the tables and say, Robert, what were you thinking when you gave me the brand Ferrari?
Well, it's funny because it was a last second decision. Right before we recorded last time, I had a few things floating in my mind about which one I wanted, and there was just this vibe. Maybe I was feeling a little sluggish and slow. Maybe I wanted a little flash and something pure and simple and exciting. And so Ferrari just kind of, raced to the front of the pack, and I decided that's what I wanted to explore.
All right. Well, it was coming, the previous episode, the previous assignment I had been given was Boeing.
Yeah.
And then, so we went Boeing, and then I kicked you back Crayola.
Yeah.
And then you kicked me back another super engineering heavy, fairly heteronormative, machine brand. And I have to say I was a little like, and I didn't immediately, it was difficult to convince my brain to be like, let's tunnel around in here and find
isn't there something
things.
kind of homoerotic about the love and the fascination with some of the curves and we give words like the body and there's a little bit of safe space for men to be gushing about a thing, right? There's something there.
Yeah, if I'm going to watch something that is if I'm going to experience something that is super straight, that is so straight it's gay, I'm like, I'll do football.
Right.
That's, I don't know. I don't know if that's the frat boy in me or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you did bring up homoeroticism because the very first thing that I Googled when I could eventually get my brain to be like, okay, let's do something, I just punched in gay Ferrari
nice.
just to see what it would give me. And that's when I found out that, do you know the only color that Ferrari will not make a car in?
Pink.
Pink is the only color. Only color you cannot get a Ferrari from Ferrari. And you can customize your own Ferrari, obviously, after you buy it. But anybody who has a pink Ferrari, they had to make it on their own because Ferrari is no, that's the queer color or whatever.
Yeah. So that set you off on a real good path, I would imagine.
Yeah, so I was like, that's fun. But you know what else was fun when I gaggled? When I gaggled, gave Ferrari. What do you think that the fourth search entry result was after I Googled gay Ferrari?
Guy Fieri.
It was.
Yes.
It was Guy Fieri's Wikipedia page. So good.
Nice. And
so that cheered me up a little bit.
Obviously,
I was like, all right, we're having fun.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, listen, here's the thing. You asked what I was thinking, and Ferrari certainly is a car company, but it's also a design icon. And I thought that there's just something about that that really interesting mix of engineering and design that I thought was maybe interesting to explore.
Yeah. So, I'm at this point in my research, I'm just kind of fumbling around, right? But I think your original question around you were interested to see where things would go on kind of design and that heritage. I made a joke about it. I think when you handed me the brand, and I was like, I know it has a horsey.
Yeah.
And I went back to that and I was like, you know what? Like, fuck it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at the logo, and
Let's
we're
look
just
at the
gonna
logo.
start from there.
Love it. Classic.
And like that really gave me this entire, like to tease this out. Basically, this took me on an Ouroboros journey.
Ooh.
Where I ended in the place where I began.
Yes.
And it felt really satisfying.
Love
So I'm going to take you through this snail. I was going to say snail eating its tail. I'm going to stick with that. The Ouroboros I have is a really long, extended sort of snail, slowly suckling on its gummy end posterior. All right, so for those who are maybe like me, potentially like need a little refresher on what the Ferrari brand looks like. If you look at the sort of the classic lockup of it, you've got a rectangle, and inside the rectangle, you've got a black horsey rearing up, tossing its glorious mane. It's on a canary yellow background, and underneath it says Ferrari, and it's got that really cool stylized kind of like top bar that goes across. It's an exceptional logo.
Yeah,
like,
it's very pretty.
Just gorgeous, super compelling. The right amount of like, it's not like we're a car. Like this is where they're not going to hire Hulk Hogan to be their because it's just like really, it has like a strong classicness to it, but it still tells you like this shit's going to be fast.
Yeah.
Like, so I think it's a super, super effective, gorgeous, really nice logo to look at. Let's break it down. These little pieces. Ferrari, as a name, once I thought about it, I was like, oh, duh. But Ferrari is basically the Italian version of the last name Smith. It just means iron worker. So it's actually an incredibly common last name in Italy. And the same way that we have the last name Smith, being that like it's just the word, the like last name that all the blacksmiths in the villages took, so that you know what they did.
Huh. You're right.
So
the Latin root for iron.
Yeah, ferrous.
Yeah.
And FE being the kind of like periodic table abbreviation.
I mean, I already learned something new. I love this. We could end the podcast right now. I'd be like, well, that was a great trip through the world of Ferrari. Thank you so much, Topher.
Yep. Snail journey done.
Snail journey.
So we got the word.
Yeah.
Interesting. Then we've got, our horsey. The yellow that the horsey is rearing against is a tribute to Enzo Ferrari, the founder of Ferrari's hometown of Modena. So Modena's color is canary yellow, and so he put the horsey on there. But once you start digging into where the horsey comes from, that's where stuff starts to get really, really interesting.
Okay, cool.
Do you know anything about that derivation of why the horse is on the Ferrari logo?
I have no clue why there's a horse there.
Okay. I thought you might, and so I was interested to see where we would need to pick it up. But all right, so where Enzo Ferrari attributes the sort of inspiration for and taking of the horse as kind of like the mascot for Ferrari, is he traces it back to a World War I Italian like ace pilot named Count Francesco Baracca.
I mean, yes.
Obviously. Francesco Baracca was a national hero. He won 34 consecutive air duels.
Dogfights?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was really, really renowned and a very popular figure in society. And he had a black horse on his plane. And so he was actually eventually shot down and died. And a few years after he died, Enzo Ferrari was somehow brought to have the opportunity to sit down with the mother and father, the Count and Countess Baracca. And the mother said, you should take the black horse as your emblem for your company. It will bring you luck. And so he sort of like, expressed his gratitude and used that. interestingly, Enzo wasn't the only person who, as a younger child, admired Count Francesco Baracca. So Ducati actually took the black stallion as their mascot and used that until the 1960s.
Huh.
And it's the same for the same reason. The engineer of Ducati was a huge fan of Count Baracca during World War II, and so also sought the patronage of Count and Countess Baracca, and Countess Baracca said, yes, pop it on your motorcycles as well.
There's enough horses to go around. Everybody get one.
The mystery, though, goes deeper when you ask the question, what brought Count Baracca, the pilot ace, to put the horse on his own plane?
I'm guessing. Is it? I don't know where it's from. I can't guess. Horsepower.
Well, there's an apocryphal story, and then there's an epistemological story.
Ooh, okay.
I'm going to take you down the apocryphal story first because it's kind of an interesting one. So, Ducati's not the only engineering vehicle company that uses a black horsey on their logo.
Yeah.
You've already mentioned this brand before, but another car brand
Porsche.
that uses a black horsey. Yes.
Oh.
Now, Porsche uses a black horse on their emblem because the Porsche emblem is the coat of arms of the city of Stuttgart in Germany.
Yeah.
And that's where Porsche was founded.
Right.
And Stuttgart is also kind of like the Detroit of Germany.
Yeah.
Like it's the car place. So Porsche popped that right on there as like a sign of provenance.
Yeah.
The apocryphal story is that Count Baracca shot down a pilot that was from Stuttgart and took his emblem and put it on his plane as a symbol of kind of like, another notch in the lipstick case.
Right.
Which apparently was common at the time.
Yeah.
Is like to take the emblems of your slain foes and put them on your own plane.
So if we had any hopes of this story getting kind of less toxic masculinity laced, I think those hopes are out the window. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry. It began and ended with me Googling gay Ferrari. But this is a place where we could potentially have kind of like looped back around, because there is a world where if that story is true, then Porsche and Ferrari have the same horse on their logo because it's the horse that is the emblem of Stuttgart.
Yeah.
But fortunately, making this interesting, we have the epistle piece of evidence that takes us in another direction. And that is that Count Baracca wrote to his mom and told her that he took the horse as his emblem because it was a tribute to the cavalry regiment that he belonged to earlier in his military career. That cavalry regiment was formed by the Duke of Savoy in 1692, and they had a horse on their coat of arms.
I mean, that's not very imaginative to have, to be in the cavalry and be like, what should we take as our coat of arms? I don't know, maybe a horse?
Yeah.
Just spitballing here, guys.
Yes. Well, so that actually took me down a whole nother like sub wormhole.
Yeah.
Because I asked the same question. At first I was like, ugh, like, huh. But it made me start to think about heraldry.
Heraldry, yeah.
And heraldic codes. We're seeing that in Porsche. We're seeing that now expressed here in, the coat of arms that inspired Baracca to pull a piece of it. But so I was like, all right, well, let's dive into that.
Yeah.
So if you permit me, we'll kind of like transition into the world of heraldry now.
I mean, absolutely. This like medieval nerd could not be happier.
So I did a little bit, I'm not an expert, but I did a little bit of research into the world of heraldry. But I would love maybe just take a step, as somebody who has lived in this space and spent a lot of time culturally in it, take a stab at just kind of like describing how you think of like heraldry and heraldic code.
Well, it's a collection of objects and symbols that say something about either your family or the place you're from, and want to convey a message about that place or that family.
Pretty solid. And like, if you were to describe it and say like, what does it look like?
Oftentimes collected on a form like a shield with different quadrants representing different parts of that story. Color is important. There's a fairly limited set of references. It's not like everything in the world shows up. There's water things, there's fire things, there's beast things.
It's like, pretty basic, blocks of color,
right.
And really, yeah. All right, so I kind of asked myself the question, like, where did heraldry come from?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what really is it? And like any, scholastic or historic ball of twine, once you start pulling on it, like, you can look at things in a few different ways. But at its most basic, heraldry, as we understand it, like you're talking about, like the shields and the symbols and the big blocks of color and stuff like that, kind of started in the 12th century, and not for one reason, but there are three major reasons that kind of started, catalyzed it from something that was before in many different cultures across a wide range of times. Like the Romans would, Constantine famously telling all his soldiers to paint the sign of the cross on their shields before they went into battle, and that kind of cemented Christianity as like the next religion of Europe. Those are recorded frequently, but they are never kind of like consistencies, like identity consistencies, where a person always has the same symbol and that represents themselves.
Right.
That doesn't start until the 12th century. And so one of the first things that is happening is that tournaments and jousting are becoming a cultural norm across medieval Europe. So society and economy has gotten to the point where they have like the ability to funnel resources into these types of like medieval pageantry and leisure time.
Right.
And technology has advanced, so people are wearing more armor. So you can't see who the person is when they're out on the field competing against each other. Crowds need to be able to tell those people apart. And they need to be able to do that from a distance. And that needs to be consistent, because you'll have many different bouts during one day. So a person's going to go from a fight earlier in the day to then like moving their way up in the ranks and fighting another person. So they can't have been red before and then blue now. It's going to make everything confusing. So like each person needs to have their own distinct visual identity in order for you to follow them through this whole thing.
Yeah.
So because cavalry is becoming more and more important, the shield isn't a massive shield that you're carrying, but the person fighting is carrying a shield that is made to be on a horse. So it's smaller and the dimensions of it are different. So when you mentioned that, like, one of the things you think about is like heraldry being on a shield shape, that's intentional, but that shield shape didn't exist before that.
Right.
So we think of the heraldic thing as happening on a shield shape that is that sort of like standard square at the top, kind of square-ish curve to the bottom, and that's for jousting specifically.
Yeah.
The second is the Crusades are starting to really get real in the 12th century. And the Crusades mean that you're mixing a ton of people from a wide variety of places who don't necessarily speak the same language. And so being able to like track who's with who is really, really important. And to be able to be like understandable to people who might not speak your language, just saying like, this is what I'm about. You need to be speaking in symbols. And it's also really, really important politically, religiously, culturally to be seen as participating in the Crusades.
Right, yeah.
So carrying a symbol of, you being there, and that being obvious on any battlefield, obvious from tents being surveyed from far away, that's really important for God himself to be able to see your symbol being foisted above Jerusalem. That's really, really important.
Yeah.
So the Crusades kind of like accelerate the need to communicate in these types of symbols. And then the last one is they're increasingly complicated, inherited lines of power at this point.
Right.
So we're not just kind of like single chief clan ruled by one person, but we're
Right.
starting to create little dynasties and fiefdoms where power is being passed down, and being able to lay claim to that is important because it's not you yourself maybe that like had the achievements of a
Right.
really famous battle. That's your grandfather, but like you need also to like claim that. So
Yeah.
you can't use yourself as the like my name carries all the deeds and all the power and all the economic impact and all the holiness. You need to have like a symbol that encapsulates all of that accrued wealth, accrued cultural power.
Yeah.
And so you need stuff that can kind of say that really quickly.
Yeah, and then also it would reflect your relationship to the larger power too. So if you were like a duke in France, you'd use like the fleur-de-lis to indicate your proximity to the king.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And so basically everything that I've listed off in terms of like appreciability, really quickly across long distances to the eye,
Right.
communicating an enormous amount of complicated information quickly and without the need to necessarily understand words, and like containing an enormous amount of like historical heritage all
Right.
wrapped into like some symbols. Like, gosh, what does that sound like?
Yeah, it's a brand.
It's a brand.
Yeah.
So I was like, that was really fun just to kind of like go into this and be like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like they organically discovered the needs to like create their own personal brands.
Right, yeah.
And
That's
so,
so cool.
heraldry is kind of, personal branding, born out of needs.
Right.
Not born out of just like style.
Yeah.
But it's really making some like really important economic and cultural impacts
Yeah.
at this time.
So you're saying that this like childhood obsession with knights and medieval times has actually prepared me for the very job that I have now. Love it.
Yeah. So we're, like I said, this is kind of starting off in the 12th century.
Yeah.
It's evolved over hundreds of years so that cities have coats of arms, churches have them, military regiments have them. And so the Piedmont Royal Regiment maybe didn't necessarily go as imaginative and chose like
Sure.
a griffin, but they did what heraldic code is supposed to do, which is really quickly communicate core
Right.
values of what they are.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, the
ride a
Piedmont
horsey.
Royal Regiment, they had a horse.
Yeah.
And they also had little cues that like said like where they were from, like they connected them to different people that put
Yeah.
it together. So it was really kind of like a little bit of like a hieroglyph or a brand mark
Yeah.
of like what they are, what they're about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's very reminiscent of the Boeing conversation we had when
Yeah.
Boeing kind of used their logo to indicate the kind of confluence of the different companies that they brought together, and it was telling this story, maybe a little bit ham-fistedly, but still in ways that were kind of clearly able to delineate.
Yeah, like you're like, I get what that means. Like
Yeah.
that's the missile,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, totally.
And so it had me think, I was looking into what are horses used for in heraldic code, and speed, I started thinking about, well, to have a horse isn't something that like necessarily everybody could even have. So there's a little bit of like a power flex
Yeah.
to it. In Ferrari, and you will be better at pronouncing this, but Scuderia Ferrari or whatever.
You do a great job.
Okay, did that do? I was
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first, like sometimes the logo is marked up in a shield, and the horse is rearing up or prancing, as they call it on the
They
Ferrari
said
website.
it's prancing?
Yes,
Okay,
and
'cause
I
I
don't
wanna
think
talk-
that's
Yeah.
true, right?
Yeah.
Like the horse is rearing, and you can call it in heraldic code. You would call that posture rampant, and they used rampant a lot because if you want to have one beast on a shield,
Right.
having it be bipedal kind of
Right.
cuts. It's a bad design choice,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So every beast is rearing up because it means that you can put them
get
into
more-
this
more
vertical form.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Scuderia Ferrari has a shield with a horse rampant, and it says SF underneath for Scuderia. And Scuderia it means stables.
Right.
So the Ferrari stables haven't ever literally been stables. From the beginning of the founding, they took the horse as the mascot and then just
Right.
called their racing team the stables.
That's pretty cool.
So there's like this connection to the power of horses. And it's got me thinking just like, well, shit. Like, let me learn a little bit more about horses and our relationship with them.
Okay.
So are you ready to move on to the final sort of like little Mario pipe warp?
So the snail is maybe three-quarters has three-quarters eaten its own body. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I just... I always liked how the rhythm kind of like peters out intentionally.
Yeah.
Like they really they break the thing, and you can tell that they're like good.
Yeah.
And then you have to wait a little bit for the whole thing to, it's a good one. Okay, so I started wondering, when did we domesticate horses? Like, how long have we been palsies with horses? What do horses really mean for us? And so I'll say it again. The moment you start digging into what feel like clear-cut questions, you get science and history involved.
Yeah.
It starts to get a little bit woollier.
Okay.
But horses, as I found in one of my articles, and I loved this phrase, are a new addition to the barnyard. So the first animals we domesticated,
Dogs.
dogs. And that's a long time ago, like 18,000 years ago, like
Right.
really, really long ago. We didn't have homes when we domesticated dogs. We're like, you want to sleep by this fire with me? And dogs were like, that's cool. Then after that, sheep and goats and pigs all started being domesticated. I think it was like 8,000 years ago.
Okay.
Horses, more like 5.5, maybe 6,000 years ago.
Before
So-
cows?
Cows weren't presented on that list, and I forgot to cross-check it.
I think that makes sense because I think that cows are related to a pretty ferocious animal that
Right.
that
Yeah, like bison and
Yeah.
buffalo and
Yeah.
like aurochs
Yeah,
and
the
muskox.
yeah, those were I think they were probably pretty let's give them a little time to
Yeah, like we didn't
de-evolve them.
domesticate mammoths. We just
Yeah.
exterminated them.
Yeah, exactly.
And it could have been a similar situation maybe with the cows,
Yeah.
that we just like ate all the scary ones. And,
Basically.
So the horses, they start getting domesticated in a few different places, which kind of, a lot of people point out, shows how much there was to be gained.
Right.
Because all these domestication events are kind of happening in Europe. And so they even though they're like a North American creature, technically,
Right.
they made their way over to Eurasia and kind of thrived over there. So all of the domestication events are kind of happening in those parts of the world. And they're different species of horses.
Yeah.
But all of those lines of horses actually die out, and we see those like genetic lines kind of like stop being part of like what constitutes a horse. And there is one genetic line that ends up being what all horses now that are domestic horses are based from. And that is from this culture in the northern Eurasian steppes called the Sintashta culture. And there are some like functional differences between these horses and other horses that biologists and historians think may have contributed to like why these horses became the horses. It's related, there's some mutations related to like gentleness, like less excitability.
Right.
There are mutations connected to stronger backs because,
Right. Bear more weight.
yeah, you can put more on the horse. And, if your horse has like a weaker back, like maybe your horse is fine running on its own, but like if it isn't fine also running carrying another beast on the back of it,
Right.
you're not going to kind of like get what you need from that horse. So they bred these horses very successfully, or lucked into some good mutations and benefited them. But I want to tell you a little bit about the culture that did this, because they cracked the code maybe on like a better horse, but like why did this culture then, why did the horse that they made become the horse that is today's horse?
Just so I know where we are geographically, so Eurasian steppes, what's that kind of like southern Russia-y, kind of northern, western Mongolia kind of, what do we...
Yeah,
Okay.
those regions. And part of the reason that we can't be like, it was this exact city, is they weren't really as much like a city building culture.
Sure.
And this was really long time ago.
Yeah.
We're talking mid-Bronze Age.
Right.
And we actually don't have like recorded records. Like as far as we know, they did not have writing systems. So we don't have anything that can tell us like directly about them. And in fact, what we have mostly is like some artifacts from them, and then also like the impressions that other cultures have of them. But this Sintashta culture is super warlike and very successful at it. So they cracked the code on acquiring a number of important technologies and then deploying them to be able to be very, very effective at conquering, raiding, and extending their power across a huge swath of that area.
Yeah.
And so it's not like they're just constrained to that little part of like Eurasia, but they are roving around and kind of, in some ways, kind of like soaking up all the best of the other cultures as they conquer them. They're kind of like picking these things up. So it might not actually have even been the Sintashta culture that domesticated the horse. They might have just conquered a people who had and been like, oh, this is pretty great. Like, let's get this in the mix. Another thing that they were really renowned for was metalworking. So very effective at mining and then putting these materials into weapons that they took now on horseback.
Yeah.
And they also created the spoked wheel. So they created chariots that the horses could pull. And so that's one of the things that we have from this Sintashta culture is like these massive Bronze Age war chariots with wheels that they used to subdue and, decimate other armies.
Yeah.
So I was kind of just like thinking about the technologies that they've put together. And like, if you really think about it, the horse is this just like massive advantage, because until 200, we're talking about like way in the 6,000 years in the past.
Yeah.
But until 200 years ago, a horse was the fastest way to get around.
Right.
And the Sintashta were obviously really, really effective at it. So they became so, oh, sorry, am I repausing?
No, I'm just actually curious. I was thinking to myself, why have I never heard the name of this culture before?
Well, so we're getting to something that you may actually is a term you will be familiar with, I think. The Sintashta culture was so prolific and influential that they actually are the source of what we call, in linguistic terms, the Proto-Indo-European language.
Gotcha.
Or PIE.
Yeah.
And I took some linguistics classes and like linguistic anthropology class and stuff like that. So I was familiar with it. I don't expect most people would be like, oh, sure, the Proto-Indo-European language. But that is basically the mother of all European and even some non-European languages. So everything that is related to Greek, ancient Greek through modern.
Right.
Everything that is related to Latin, so Romance languages.
Right.
Any Slavic language,
any
Baltic language, any Germanic language, any Iranian language, Celtic language, all of those, their roots are in the Proto-Indo-European language, which is what the Santashta culture
Right.
spoke.
Interesting, like absences there though. Like Turkish is not part of that, right? Because Turkish comes from a different root, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah.
And like I think Hungarian maybe is
Yeah,
different.
they're related.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
So I was looking through some of the roots and like for trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
Because we don't have any written records, we have had to do what they call linguistic reconstruction, where they just like keep going back further
Right.
and further and further. And so they're creating like and sort of like intuiting the derivations of all of the different
right.
words and things like that. But they've been therefore able to put together a dictionary of Proto-Indo-European language. And the word for horse is something that you will absolutely recognize.
Okay.
Equo.
Oh, of course, yeah. Right.
Like equus in Latin, equine, equestrian.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I mean, like, and we're talking this is a voice from 6,000 BC or 6,000 years ago.
6,000 years ago.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
So this, once I like took a beat, because I had kind of gone pretty far into this thing.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, shit. And this is where the snail
Okay.
realizes that he's been nibbling on his own tail. He's like gotten to the shell
Yeah.
now, and he's like, oh my God, I made a horrible mistake.
Right.
Or maybe he's like, wow, I finally got to the juicy center.
Yeah.
I realized that what I had been reading about was the culture that created the Ferrari brand. Because
Right.
this is, in one swoop, we are talking about a culture that created the Italian language to be able to talk about a metal worker
Right.
who created a contraption that is run on spoked wheels
Right.
and that takes the horse as the representation of its power.
I mean, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. And I mean, the thing is that, you know, per your Mario metaphor, you went down a lot of different tubes, and there was no way to know that you would have ended there.
No. Yeah.
But there's, I mean, what's interesting is that perhaps that's why it's such a resonant symbol, is because it carries with it all of that intentionality and intensity that is located in a culture, but in a place, and speaks with like volumes beyond what it should, because it has all that baked into it.
Yes. I deeply, deeply agree with that. That we're talking about at least 6,000 years of coded cultural and linguistic heritage that also speak to the intense amount of like respect and like relational success that we feel when we are in the presence of or are reminded of a horse. You know, like
Yeah.
that's an enormous amount of, like, we didn't borrow a thing from another culture that we don't kind of, you know, what, like
Right.
we're dealing with something like, if you are a person who is of a Western culture and you see the Ferrari logo, Ferrari is tugging on 6,000 years
Right.
of emotions, of success, power, you know, speed, of heritage, like,
Right.
just through that one little mark. And that's why it's, I think, one of the reasons why it's so successful.
Yeah, and and the fact that it's used often, and then used by companies and brands that are signifying a kind of peak performance of some kind. That's super fascinating. Yeah, and it's you know, it's funny because like at the top of this show we talk about how basically what we do is look at these intersections of culture and history and desire and symbol, and you know, we you know, do it for great brands, but we also do it for brands that are not going to be the Ferraris of the world, but will do something really spectacular in their own realm. and we pull on those same strings, or we try to pull on the ones that are relevant. And it's not just fluffery. It's really about what chords can we strike in people that are shared, and they're shared because we have shared history, or we have inherited symbols and these packets of meaning through our culture.
Mm-hmm. Those things matter, even when we don't like consciously know they matter. We're hacking into solutions that, shield painters in, 1182 Rens, had to figure out.
Right.
And we're standing on the problem solving that they use to be able to figure out how to do something successfully today.
Wow. I mean, really, Topher, you have outdone yourself. You have taken us into prehistory to unearth the origins of Ferrari's power. And I personally appreciate it because I was glad to spend some time with jousting and heraldry. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah. And it all started with me being like, boo. I know they got a horsey.
I also love that you call it a horsey. Constantly. It's always a horsey.
I was a little bit of a horse kid. I remember one day being like, my family must be so poor because we can't afford to buy me a horse. And it's the only thing I want in the world. And I remember just like being so sad. And my mom just explaining like, yeah, we can't afford that. And that was like maybe the first thing that I like remember as a kid being like not able to afford. You know what I mean? It wasn't that I wasn't allowed to have it. It's that actually like it just wasn't realistic. And that was like a sad moment for me.
Did you have there was always like somebody in the broader kind of social circle in Virginia who like had access to a horse. There was never a close friend, so I would never actually be able to ride the horse. But there's always like, oh, did you know that Carolyn Ash has a horse? Like, what? How's that possible? Like, how am I in the same circle with this person? I don't also get a horse. This is ridiculous.
We had like, in Albuquerque, we had like, like folks that lived in the country, like they'd have a horse. You know what I mean? So like our piano teacher, Arlene Judd, she had 2 horses. We'd have to drive out way out on dirt roads to like go take lessons from her.
Yeah.
So it was a little more like I also didn't totally buy it because I was like, wait, so our piano teacher has 2 horses and you're telling me we can't afford a horse?
She's a piano teacher, for crying out
loud.
Yeah. What does she possibly make? Also, Arlene Judd had to be in music with that name. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. She was very much that.
Yeah.
Her house did smell a little bit of cat pee. I also remember that about her. But
she's an animal lover, so.
Yeah. But she was a lovely lady. I wish her all the. I assume she's maybe not still around, but
Yeah, she's gone to that great ranch, cat pee smelling ranch in the sky.
Great piano ranch in the sky.
Oh my God! Well, that's so awesome. I really appreciate you taking us through all that. So, with that kind of epic journey behind us, where am I headed next? What's happening?
Well, so I initially started feeling resistant about the kind of like engineering focus and mechanic blah 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 blah. But the more I got into it, the more I realized kind of like, oh, there's actually just like engineering is always just a way to solve a problem.
Yeah.
But I thought, let's take things away from the more epic, speedy, high performance, high gloss world. And I wanted to ask you to explore a very different environment where engineering is being deployed to solve problems or to create experiences.
All right.
And so the brand that I would like you to investigate is Cuisinart.
Oh, love it. That's awesome. This is great. This is really great. Cuisinart, because oh man. And then in their like I'm excited to see where they fit in the pantheon of kitchen appliances. You've got your Cuisinarts, you got your KitchenAids.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
I'll
be honest, it was a little bit of a toss-up for me between Cuisinart and KitchenAid.
Yeah.
And I just sort of made the call. And so if that comes up, feel free to discover, but like, I don't know. I was just sort of like, I'll pick one of the two.
I mean, just the name alone is fantastic, like.
Yeah. And there's it gives me a little bit of like some throwback vibes that I'm kind of fun about. Yeah.
Yeah. Fully gives throwback vibes. But they're modernizing themselves. They're not resting on their laurels. Well, that's going to be awesome. I'm super excited about that. I might have to. Do I have a Cuisinart? I might actually have a Cuisinart food processor. Okay. So that'll be exciting. Maybe we can actually bring a prop next time. We'll see. I don't want to promise anything. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. But for that, you'll just have to see where we go and join us next time. You've been listening to Strange Coordinates, the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising and fascinating places. Your hosts are Topher Burns and me, Robert Baylog. So if you want to learn more about our agency, Territorial, which I suggest you do, we're a lot of fun. It's really interesting stuff. Go to our website at weareterritorial.com. Please join the mailing list where you'll find out about the latest episodes and more. And then follow us on LinkedIn.
Yes. And thank you, everybody. Robert and I are going to be galloping off into the distance now.
Just like, what if I just like took off my, headset and then you saw me ride by on a horse.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Or you can just mime it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.